Today, we give it up for British media, where dry lips meet scowls and sentiments are strewn all over about anything even remotely related to Trump. Let's take a ride, though, into an interview whereby Fred Fleets, the vice chair of the America First Policy Institute and a man with a resume longer than a CVS receipt, sits down with a British Channel 4 host to discuss NATO, Ukraine, Iran, and, oh yes, media bias. Spoiler alert, things get spicy. Let's break it.
No, I want to start with Fred Trump. I saw your interview with Fred Trump. I thought that was one of the most tawdry and irresponsible pieces of journalism I have ever seen. Donald Trump wins a conclusive mandate to remake American politics, to remake global security, and you pull up some relative I've never heard of, I've never seen on TV, to whine about Trump for 5 minutes.
And he just goes right into it. The host gives him a cheery intro, you know, the standard polite lead-in, but Fred's having none of it. Within seconds, he's already swinging, calling a previous interview's hoddy and irresponsible. And what's he upset about? The host brought on a distant Trump relative to badmouth the former president. Fred's reaction? Absolute horror. I can almost hear him thinking, Fred Trump? Who the heck is Fred Trump? Is there a Trump I don't know about? He calls the segment a wine fest and goes on to accuse the British media of plotting Trump's downfall over tea and biscuits. And honestly, watching the host's face, he probably is really thinking of calling HR at this point. Fred interjects a little poke about British people being staggered by Trump's political fortunes, just for the record. A bold opening move. It's like starting the game of chess by flipping the board over and declaring yourself the winner.
It simply goes how the liberal British elite are out to get Trump. They're not interested in objective journalism. Right. That's why the British people were so surprised at this outcome. They've seen these lies on your channel, in the BBC, in The Economist. So, I mean, I don't even know what the point is talking with you. You're so incredibly biased. I think Trump is going to remake global politics.
May I respond to that? And now, Fred truly gets going. He goes on to say that the liberal British elite doled out lies about Trump. This is where Fred switches gears into full Lecture the After-School special. He tells the host, let me speak to you about the global politics, and then makes the point about Trump being good for the UK and Europe.
Donald Trump's tenure as president was pretty good for the UK, was pretty good for Europe. I seem to remember the Ukraine war started under Joe Biden. That's something I don't think we're going to hear on your channel.
There's always a tiny stick or humiliation jab. Fred reminds people that the Ukraine war started during the presidency of Joe Biden. Cue the host's awkward silence. You can see him itching to contend with it, but Fred roars ahead like a freight train fueled by frustration and sheer determination. What's particularly amusing here is that Fred doesn't seem to act as if he expects the host to bring this up himself. It's that kind of sulking teacher disappointed in a student who hasn't done their homework. Why isn't the Ukraine war being talked about? Do I have to do everything around here?
Let's try and be responsible then and talk about the issues at hand. NATO. Will he pull out of NATO or not?
Donald Trump has made very clear in his America First approach to U.S. national security that he wants a strong president, a strong national security policy, a strong military to work in cooperation with our allies and alliances, but also to make sure that members of these alliances carry their own weight.
The NATO discussion continues. And this is where Fred becomes a real policy nerd. The delicate host has asked whether Trump, by his imminent pulling out of the US from NATO, and Fred's rebuttal, of course not, but...
I'm not going to speak for Trump on how he's going to do this. I will say he's going to be pretty tough with NATO members who are not paying their 2% of GDP as they're required to under their agreements with other NATO members.
Ah, yes. There's always a but. Fred launches into an innocent speech about how NATO countries are not pulling their part, concentrating on those who fail to meet the 2% GDP defence contribution requirement. He keeps it professional, mostly. The host attempts to lead the conversation back toward diplomacy, but Fred has already moved on. Next topic, please.
I was hoping to get to all those points, and I'm glad that you've done that. But he was talking about family, and as far as I know, you're not a member of the Trump family. We were talking about personal stuff. And that was very much his personal view. He wasn't talking about the election. He wasn't talking about the political strategy. He wasn't talking about that. He was talking...
And let us be frank. The whole ordeal has the feel of one of those awkward family gatherings in which someone snitches out one sibling for not pulling their weight. Here, however, it is a little bigger than who pays for Christmas dinner.
He has said that he would end the war in Ukraine in the first 24 hours of being in office. How do you think he's going to do that?
You know, the issue for the war in Ukraine is that we have a situation where we have American and British and European politicians who are sending weapons to Ukraine for as long as it takes, but there's no strategy to end the war. They're basically doing this for virtue signaling. They think Putin is evil. They want to send weapons there, but this is promoting a war of attrition that is killing all the Ukrainian soldiers. There's going to be a shortage of Ukrainian young men.
And then we head to Ukraine. The host puts Trump's very claim to the test that he can completely end the war in 24 hours, a highly boastful statement, to carry one along with fireworks and marching bands. Fred doesn't flinch. He says that Western leaders are essentially dragging their feet and sending stuff for as long as it takes, but with no strategy to bring the war to an end. Fred makes it sound like these politicians just sit in their fancy offices saying, "Let's send another crate of weapons and just hope for the best." Cutting, sarcastic, brutally effective.
We're going to start to end the war, and this is my opinion, what Mr. Trump will do, by having a president determined to stop it, to start negotiations. So how he's going to do that, he hasn't told me his plan, but I think the first step to ending the war is to have a world leader who wants to end the war.
But the best part, Fred hasn't even made a plan. He simply says, "We need a leader who will end the war." Translation: Trump will figure it out, trust me. Bold move, Fred. Bold move. Plus, as if that weren't great enough, he comes off as doing all that while casually not breaking a sweat. The host? He looks like someone who has aged 5 years or appears to have. The poor guy must have thought about speaking on policy. He'll be roped into a roasting session on live television.
Let's move on to Iran. I know that in the first Trump administration, correct me if I'm wrong, that there were divisions within the cabinet about how to deal with Iran. Some people wanted intervention, others didn't. You now have got this war with Iran and Israel. What do you think he'll do about that?
Well, I heard Nick Mulvaney complaining about who might be in the Trump cabinet. I'll tell you, there will be quite a few very qualified national security experts working for Mr. Trump. A problem in the first term is that the president brought some people in who did not support his objectives with Iran on either fixing or pulling out of the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran, the JCPOA. I believe that Mr. Trump will restore maximum pressure. He's going to bankrupt Iran until it stops sponsoring terrorism and meddling in the region. But as in the first administration, he'll be willing to talk to America's adversaries, whether it's Iran or China or Russia.
Now we move on to Iran, or, as you might call it, Trump's favourite geopolitical headache, according to Fred. The host has been inquiring about the differences among Trump administration members in his first term, and Fred does admit that there were some hiccups. Apparently, not everyone was on board with Trump's maximum pressure strategy, which Fred insists is the real deal when dealing with Iran. And what is maximum pressure, you ask? According to Fred, maximum pressure consists of really squeezing Iran economically until it gives up terrorism out of sheer exhaustion. It would be economic tough love, Trump style. Fred adds that this time around, Trump's cabinet will be filled with qualified national security experts, which, frankly, is just a polite way of saying, "No amateurs, please," according to Fred. The host pressed Fred on whether he would join Trump's team, and of course Fred, ever the politician, replied, "I'd be honoured," because of course he would. And who wouldn't want to be in the midst of such a political circus?
Actually, as I remember the interview with Mick Mulvaney, I think he said there were some good people around that Trump could call upon to join him in the cabinet, but maybe I misheard that. Would you be one of those people? Are you waiting for a phone call from Mr. Trump?
Look, I'd be honored to work for the president. I worked for him before. He hasn't asked yet. We'll see.
Just like that, it ends. The host, clearly tired from all the sparring, questions Fred one last time. Would you take a call from Trump? Fred doesn't hesitate. He says, "I would be honoured," which is the political equivalent of, "If he calls, I'm packed and on the first flight to Mar-a-Lago." A nice, neat conclusion to a chaotic interview, though you can tell the host already is regretting every life choice that has led him to this moment. The sheer optimism in Fred's voice is just something to behold. He is already imagining cosy cabinet meetings, politically charged policy briefings, and the dispute over who sits where. And do you know what? Good for him. The man has confidence, if nothing else. So what did we learn today? Well, to start with, Fred Flitz doesn't mince his words. He's like that uncle who comes to Thanksgiving and always has something to say, but instead of critiquing turkey recipes, he's out trying to tear up NATO policy and media bias. We also learned that Trump still has serious muscle behind his America First policy, with die-hard fans who truly believe he will be the one to fix everything from NATO spending to the Ukraine war. Whether you agree with him or not, you should give it up for the sheer gall. As regards the hosting party, let us just say he probably did not like this very much as an interview. He came in with an interview in tow, expecting a cool debate, and ended up smack in the middle of a geopolitical roast session. Better luck next time, buddy. That's it for today. If you have hung around up to this point, then congratulations. You have survived the Fred Flitz experience.